This session is on measurement and metrics. I want to show the first slide, which is basically this difference in the perception of versus reality. How does data help to show what is the difference in the perception versus the actual reality of things? So this particular graph, the gray bars are the percentage of adults suggesting that the government is addressing educational needs fairly well or very well. The black bars are the percentage of children in standard 4 who passed standard 2 literacy and numeracy tests. So if you ask common people, how is the government addressing the needs, do you think that the government is really addressing the needs of the education needs very well? And they say yes. They have been, you see the gray bars, they are soaring high, and they suggest that the government is really addressing the needs very well. But if you look at the black bars, which are the student learning bars, you see that there's a wide variation between what they perceive versus what the actual learning levels of these children are. So this graph to me, I think, is really critical because it shows the difference between what is perceived versus what the actual reality is, and that's where the data element really comes in. Data is able to show whether our perceptions are close to the reality or whether our perceptions are very different. In education, we've seen that many times we've seen that our perception is very different from what the actual reality is in classrooms. I'll give you an example of the Millennium Villages project. We've been able to collect this quick and dirty data, as we call, on a very regular basis. In education, we often find that the data is either delayed or there's lots of obstacles, there's lack of capacity in accessing the data, processing the data. We don't have funding for people who can do data crunching. This data really comes in much later. Students have either by then actually graduated to the next grade or have fallen back, and data was helpful to see a retrospective aspect of what we were able to do. But is not really helpful in program implementation and design as we go along. So at the Millennium Villages, we have tried to rectify this problem by collecting data on a monthly basis. This has been revolutionary in many ways. First is because it also we were able to do this because it uses technology in a really effective way. We were able to use smartphones to gather this data on a real-time basis. So no one is really sitting and entering this data. But at the same time, multiple people are able to see this data as soon as it is collected. We analyze some common trends and patterns and also communicate with our site teams on what we find some of the challenges in terms of the data. We've been able to use this mobile phone platform very effectively to be able to generate data which is very quick. We have been able to generate data with 4 or 5 main indicators, really simple indicators, which I think are all the key indicators to ensure that the school functioning is captured by those indicators. So student and teacher attendance is one data, learning assessments, student learning assessments, supply availability of teaching learning materials, pens, pencils, etc. Infrastructure availability and reliability in terms of whether there is running water, whether there is running electricity in these schools. Those are some of the key indicators that we've been able to gather on a really frequent basis. So I now also want to show you some case studies that show how this data loop has been really closed and how we've been able to make use, not only collect the data efficiently, but also at the same time make use of this data. This case study is from Mali, from the Millennium Villages site at Tibi, which if you see the graph, it basically shows this map of our site, where we have these yellow, green and blue dots which show the proportion of enrolled students attending the class at the time of the visit. So they show student attendance at the time of the visit, and you see that there is a red area and then there is a green area. The green area basically shows that the attendance in this particular area is weak. And very surprisingly, in the same cluster, the attendance of the schools in the red area is very strong. So there is a difference between the schools in the red area and the green area. We try to ask our coordinators, government staff, on why do we really see this difference, this geographical difference between the area marked in red and the area marked in green. The area marked in red is where schools are clustered around each other. It is urban, semi-urban area. Schools are very close to each other, and the attendance seems to be higher than the rest of the areas, which is marked in green. And the more we investigated, we found out that the areas that are marked in green are in the rural, remote areas in the cluster. It's very difficult to reach these schools. It is highly spread out, as you can see. So it becomes difficult to even access the schools, and therefore the attendance of the children in these particular areas is low. We were able to diagnose this particular problem very efficiently in the first 2 months of the data being collected, and have been able to work with the school supervisors, have been able to work with the government departments, our own team, to increase school supervision, to increase our participation in these schools that have had low student attendance. And that's how this is one of the case studies I want to highlight, where we've been able to use this real-time data much more effectively, and have been able to diagnose a particular problem and communicate as well as rectify this problem on a real-time basis. Another story is from Ghana. This particular site in Ghana, as you see in this particular map, we see that there are schools that are marked in these multicolored circles, and basically the indicator in this particular site, in this particular map, shows that the number of primary grade 3 students in the observed classrooms who have acquired basic reading skills. So it shows the reading levels of children for this particular cluster, and it shows that the circles that are red, or the schools that are in red color, which are all located, somehow seems to be located in the south part of the cluster. And we were surprised why all these schools that are located in the south part of the cluster have low reading skills. It turns out that these are the most rural, remote part of the West Amansi district in Ghana, and we see that the teachers are not too happy accepting these postings in these rural, remote settings, because it's difficult to reach those schools, as well as the teachers who do accept the postings are untrained. They are untrained teachers who tend to go to these schools and are working there. Along with this rural, remote part, along with the teachers not really willingly accepting positions there, we also have a problem of weak teacher attendance in these schools. So all these combined factors impact the learning levels of these children in our site, and we've been able to verify, we've been able to validate this particular finding. We've been able to make use of this analysis that we did real time, and have been able to make impact in terms of improving our own supervision, improving our own advocacy with the government, that more teachers need to be posted there. We provide a lot of teacher training in those particular schools. Now we've been able to support a lot of teachers in basic numeracy and literacy in those particular schools especially. So I think this is a good example of how programmatically this frequent data on a monthly basis has been very effective in not only telling us what the challenge is, but also helping us to remediate or to provide an intervention that helps to counteract this particular problem, and not wait for another year to go by or another 2 years to go by. moving on to how do you make this data digestible. Collecting real-time data and also making use of the real-time data in efficient ways, we need to really think about how we can make the data digestible by all. By this I mean, how can we make the data easy to read, easy to understand from different stakeholders. So it is not just us who are collecting the data or are disseminating, it is also how do we engage the community in this particular process, and what are the indicators that we use, how can we actually empower the community to collect the data with us, as well as to be able to share this data to improve their own schools. That is something that we really are closely focusing on. For example, when we get this real-time data, we create report cards. Each school has a report card, and every month we are able to provide this report card to the schools. Then the schools are actually discussing the report cards with their own teachers, different stakeholders are involved. For example, in Uganda, in our site in Uganda, we have been able to use the school inspectors have been able to use the report cards to understand which are the low performing schools and how we can improve the interventions in those particular schools. In Mayanje in Rwanda, we've been able to provide this report card to all the stakeholders, including other NGOs that are involved in decision making in the schools in that particular area. In Tanzania, the report cards are being used to have a contest amongst the different schools, where some of the schools who win get an award from the community in terms of how well the school is doing when the data is reflected in the report card. So again, this idea of report card is making sure that everyone understands the processes of the schools are transparent, learning level of students are transparent, and it's a good way of discussing education issues in the community.